An original Saturday Night Live writer who the New York Times said has earned his place in the pantheon of pop culture, Alan Zweibel has won multiple Emmy, Writers Guild of America, and TV Critic Awards for his work in television, which includes It's Garry Sandling's Show, which he co-created and produced, Monk, and Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's a frequent guest, oh no, it's much longer than that, guys. A frequent guest in talk shows such as The Late Night with David Letterman, The Late Show with Jimmy Fallon. Alan's theatrical contributions include his collaboration with Billy Crystal on the Tony Award-winning play 700 Sundays, the off-Broadway hit Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, a sort of romantic comedy, which he adapted from his best-selling book, as well as Martin Short's Broadway hit, Fame Becomes Me. Alan has written the 2006 Thurber Prize-winning novel, The Other Schulman, the popular children's book, Our Tree Named Steve, and a collection of short stories and essays titled Clothing Optional. His humor has appeared in such diverse publications as Esquire, The Atlantic Monthly, the New York Times op-ed page, the Huffington Post, and Mad Magazine. In films, he wrote the screenplays for Dragnet, North, and The Story of Us, as well as popular children's books, Our Tree Named Steve. 2 years ago, Alan was given an honorary PhD from the State University of New York, and in 2010, the Writers Guild of America presented him with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Alan's currently working with Billy Crystal on a movie version of 700 Sundays, which is set to start production in November, has written a new one-man Broadway show for Daryl Hammond, producing the new Showtime series Inside Comedy with David Steinberg, and the movie rights for his newest novel called Lunatics, which he co-wrote with Dave Barry, was just bought by Universal, and Steve Carroll is attached to play one of the lead roles. But the production that Alan is most proud of is his family. He's co-produced with his wife, Robin, their children, Adam, Lindsay, Adam's wife, Corey, and their grandchildren, Zachary and Alexis. Please join me in welcoming Alan Zweibel.
Thank you. And thank you, Karen, for that glowing introduction that I wrote. I'm Alan, and I'm a writer, and I'm going to talk about being a writer. And I'm thrilled that you guys have asked me to give this speech, and I find the whole thing so ironic in a way that I'm in this position because, to be perfectly honest with you, originally it wasn't even my idea to become a comedy writer. This was a decision that was made for me about 35 years ago by every law school in the United States. You know, I went to college, I did good, I got good grades, but they made you take the law boards, the LSATs, and they graded them from 200 to 800. If you can write your name, you got a 200. If you were Albert Einstein, you got an 800. If you were Alan Zweibel, you got a 391, which automatically reclassified me as mineral. And I remember going back home and telling my Long Island Jewish parents that I got a 391 in the law boards. And about a week later, this is after they uncovered the mirrors, got up off of those wooden boxes they were sitting on. My dad gave me $1,000, which I then took and gave to a man named Stanley Kaplan. You guys know who this guy is? For those of you who may not know, Stanley Kaplan is a man who's got these schools all over the country that teach you, they prepare you to take standardized exams. So I wanted to retake the law board, so I gave him the $1,000, and for 6 months, I studied, I had a #2 pencil, I had earphones, I kept on going over all the old tests, and I retook the law boards. And my score catapulted up to a 403. Well, I figured at that rate, it would take me, I'd be around 90 before I got into an English-speaking law school. So I started writing jokes. I started writing jokes for comedians who worked in the Catskill Mountains. You familiar with the Catskill region of New York? Back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they had all these hotels about 100 miles north of the city where all these great comedians, it was the breeding ground for comedians back then. That's where Alan King and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Red Buttons, they all came through. Even my heroes who later wrote and starred in Your Show or Shows, they came through those hotels. By the time I got there, this is in the early 70s after college, well, I was left with the guys, every Freddie, Mickey, Dickie, Morty, and Lee that ever lived, who was still there. I wrote jokes for them for $7 a joke. That was the going rate at the time, and some of them were really pains in the ass because they would only pay me if the joke got a laugh. Now understand, I'm 21, and I'm writing for guys my parents' age, and I borrow my parents' car, and I drive from Long Island up to one of the hotels, and I'd sit in the back to see if my jokes worked, and invariably, the comic would come off the stage and go, Alan, that joke about the paving of the driveway really went straight into the toilet. And I go, I heard a lot of laughs, and so then we'd bargain. And I go home with $4, okay? So I was going nowhere fast. You want to hear some $7 jokes? Now, mind you, I'm 21 years old, and I'm writing jokes for these guys who are 50. So I get a phone call from a very nice man, very good comic named Freddie Roman. He goes, Alan, sperm is in the news. I said, really? He said, well, not sperm per se, but sperm banks are in the news. Can you write some sperm bank jokes? So I remember the first joke I ever sold. I had said something to the effect of, what did I say? I said, they have a new thing now called sperm banks, which is just like an ordinary bank. Except here, after you make a deposit, you lose interest. Hey, $7, stop. So I became the sperm bank guy. Guys were calling, more sperm bank. I go, geez, another sperm bank joke. All right. I looked into the future. I said, there's going to be a problem with these sperm banks because they were starting to freeze sperm. And I said, it's going to be a big problem in the future because it's hard enough telling a kid he's been adopted. How do you tell him he's been defrosted, $7, okay? Then my price went to $10 and $12. I got the highest I think I ever got was $18. I got high for a joke that I had written about a Hasidic orgy, which was very unusual because the men were on one side of the room and the women were on the other. It was like a feeding frenzy for that one. I was going nowhere fast, I was living at home with my parents. This is after college, and I took a job in a delicatessen in Queens, New York, to supplement this terrific living that I was making as a joke writer. And these guys were all the same person. There were no defined persona. They all wore tuxedos, they looked very nice, and I just wrote jokes. If the joke worked, it got a laugh, but they had no defined character. There was no nuance to it. And I wanted to write scripts one day, and I knew that not everybody sounds the same. Later on, when I started writing for guys like Rodney Dangerfield, let's say, it became easier because he had a defined character. He always said, I don't get no respect. So it was easy to have Rodney say, even as an infant, my mother wouldn't breastfeed me. She said she liked me as a friend. Okay, that was easy. But I saw the writing on the wall and I went, something's going to change because I'm going to die in my parents' house slicing meat in a deli. There were two clubs in New York City at the time. One was called the Improvisation, the other one was called Catch a Rising Star, and these were the new Catskills. This was the new spawning ground for comedians. That's where Richard Pryor, my friend Larry David, David Steinberg, David Brenner, Bette Midler, Lily Tomlin, they were coming through these clubs, and I'm going, okay, that's more my sensibility. So I came up with a plan, which was to take all the jokes that those old guys in the Catskills wouldn't buy from me, because it was a little, as they said, too blue for their audience, and I made it into a stand-up act for myself. And the plan was to go on stage and deliver the jokes with the hope that a manager or an agent or somebody would walk in, like the material, and give me a job as a TV writer. That's what I wanted to do. And I'm there about a week into this experiment, and I meet another guy who's just starting out. His name is Billy Crystal. And he lived about 4 towns over from my parents on Long Island. And so he would pick me up every night in a little blue Volkswagen at my parents' house. We'd drive into the city, we would do our jokes, and then we would drive home and critique each other. I'm about 4 months into this experiment. I'm on stage one night, and I'm having the hardest time in the world making these 6 drunks from Des Moines laugh. So I get off the stage and I go to the bar, and now I'm waiting for Billy so he can drive me home. And I'm just sitting there and I'm depressed, and it's only 4 months into this, but I don't know how long this is gonna last, and I'm not a comic. And a guy comes in and he sits next to me, and he just starts staring at me and staring at me. I finally go, what? What do you want? And he goes, you're the worst comedian I've ever seen in my life. I said, well, thank you. I really need to hear that now. It's good timing on your part. He said, well, your material's not bad. Did you write it? And I said, yes. He said, well, can I see more? And I said, you bet. And I didn't even know who this guy was at first. At this point, I would have shown it to like a gardener, Well, it ends up, this is Lorne Michaels. And this is 1975, it's April of 1975, and he's going from club to club in New York City looking for actors and writers for this new show that he was going to have on in the fall called Saturday Night Live. I go back to my parents' house. I stay up 2 days straight, sitting at my mom and dad's kitchen table, typing what I believe were 1,100 of my best jokes. 2 days. It was time to go meet Lorne in the city, and I was so nervous. I didn't know what to wear, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, young, hip producer, young, hip show. Oh, okay, I'll dress young, I'll dress hip. I put on my father's maroon polyester leisure suit. I looked like a big blood clot sitting on the Long Island Railroad, going into the city for my big meeting with Lorne. And I was, nervous, and meeting was like at 2 o'clock, and I really didn't want to be late, so I got there at like 7 in the morning. And I'm sitting in the lobby now, waiting to go up, and I see a payphone. It's 1975, there's no cell phones. I see a payphone, and I call Billy Crystal. Billy had been talking to Lorne about this brand new show, and there was some talk originally that Billy might be on it as a regular. Well, that didn't work out, but they spent time together, they had dinner, they spoke comedy, and I said, listen, I'm gonna have a meeting in a little while with this guy, Lorne Michaels. Anything you can tell me about him to give me sort of like a leg up? He said, well, he used to write for Woody Allen. He's produced Monty Python specials. Oh, and he hates mimes. Lorne hates mimes. Got it. Okay. 2 o'clock, I go upstairs. I sit on the edge of the bed. He pulls up a chair, and I hand him this tome with 1,100 jokes in it. I plop it on his lap. He opens it. He reads the first joke, and he goes, uh-huh. And then he closes the book. I'm up for 2 days, typing 1,100 jokes. He reads one, And to show you how long ago this was from the reference points, I had written a joke saying that the post office was about to issue a stamp commemorating prostitution in the United States. 10-cent stamp. If you want to lick it, it's a quarter. And he went, good. This is very good. He said, how much money do you need to live on? I said, well, I'm making $2.75 an hour at the deli. Match it. And he said, well, tell me a little bit more about yourself, which I took to mean, before he committed to this kind of cash, he wanted to see what he was buying, So I said to him, Woody Allen's my idol, love Monty Python, but if there's one fucking mime on this show, I am out of here. And he gave me a job. It was the greatest day of my life. I was 24 years old, and now I'm going to be a TV comedy writer. And you just got to put this in perspective. This is 1975. There's no cable. There wasn't even Fox. There was... That always gets a laugh for some reason. I don't know why. But it was ABC, CBS, NBC. That was television. And I now go to report for my first day at NBC, which was then called the RCA building in Rockefeller Center. And it was every dream I ever had came true. My dad manufactured jewelry, and his place was on 52nd between 5th and Madison. And I would deliver, make deliveries for him, errands. And no matter where the delivery had to go, I always made sure I went through that lobby, because maybe I'd see Johnny Carson at those years had the Tonight Show upstairs. And in the early 60s, there was a show called That Was the Week That Was. And I wanted to see, these guys were doing things that I wanted to do. And now I was reporting to work there. And it was our first day, it's July of '75. And we were all meeting in Lorne Michaels' office to talk about this new show. And I'm looking around, and I see Belushi, and I see Aykroyd, and Chevy, and Franken, and these are the funniest people in the world. And all of a sudden, I got really cold feet. I go, oh man, I can't, I'm not going to exist in this room. And I looked around, and in the corner of Lorne's office was a big potted plant. I went behind the plant, and I squatted down. The biggest day of my life, okay? And I'm squatting behind a plant. Now the meeting starts, and then all of a sudden, I hear from the other side of the plant somebody say, can you help me be a parakeet? I parted the leaves. I looked out, and it was Gilda. And I said, what? She said, yeah, I think it'd be really funny if I acted like a parakeet. I'd scrunch up my face and stand on a perch. But I need something for the parakeet to say. I need a writer who really writes good for birds. Could you write for something for a parakeet? I had no idea what she was talking about. But at least somebody was talking to me, and I went, I'm a great parakeet writer. And then she said, good. Let me ask you something. Why are you behind the plant? You nervous? I said, yeah, I'm a little nervous. She said, is this your first TV show, Alan? I went, yeah. How do you know my name's Alan? She said, you're the only one wearing a name tag. So she said, look, is there any room back there? Because it's my first TV show, and I'm a little nervous, too. So I scooched over, Gilda comes around, and now we're both squatting behind the plant. And the meeting is going on, and I got to know my buddy Gilda back there behind this plant. We made each other laugh a little bit, and we got to know each other. And we actually had our first fight behind this plant. At one point she says, do you want gum? And I said, yeah, I'd love some gum. And she hands me a pocketbook the size of my high school, okay, one of these big, and she says, oh, go take some gum. I go, it's in there? She said, yeah, just take gum. I go, no, I can't do that. She says, what do you mean? I said, I can't go. And she says, look, you said you wanted gum. I have gum in there. Open it up, take what you want. I said, I can't. She said, why? I said, well, because I'm a boy, you're a girl, and there may be some things inside of this pocketbook that will eventually end up inside of you. Because I'm a writer with a very vivid imagination. So I said, yes, I do want gum, but can you please serve it to me? She said, you're Jewish, aren't you? I said a little. She says, no, major. And she starts pushing the pocketbook. We're having this fight. Then all of a sudden, you hear Lauren go, Alan, where's Alan? I saw him here before. And Gilda said, he wants to hear your ideas for sketches. She goes, do you have any? I said, yeah, but they stink and I don't like talking in front of people. She said, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. So she steps out from behind the potted plant. By the way, this move here, this is the action portion of my show. This was the car chase, okay? And she says, Zweibel has got this great idea where I play a parakeet. She attributed her idea to me. And she said, he's got tons and tons of ideas, and come on out, Alan. And she takes me by the hand and leads me out like her retarded brother, you know. And she goes, he's really funny, and we're going to be writing partners and platonic friends forever. The writing partner part was fun. The platonic part, you know, I always feel that there's, you know, in any platonic relationship, there's always one person who doesn't want it to be platonic. But you go, okay, fine. If those are the rules now, I'll live by it. But one day you'll wake up and come to your senses, and here I am. So we became buddies, and we started writing, and we all started this brand new show. And it's so many years later, but I have to tell you, it still remains the most exciting time in my life. I write plays now, I write books, I write Broadway shows, I write movies, and if I'm lucky, they get to see the light of day 2 years from now. But here, on a live television show, you can write something on Monday, and millions of people see it on Saturday. Or there were times where I would go upstairs. You know, there's at 7:30 on Saturday nights, there's a dress rehearsal in front of a full audience, okay? And everybody's in costume, and the band plays, they put on a show. And then between that dress rehearsal and the air show at 11:30, that audience leaves, we all sit down, what sketches are in, what sketches are out, and we tweak them, and we bring them to cue cards. And then if there was time, this is before 24-hour news networks, okay? I would go upstairs, watch the 11 o'clock news, and if something struck me as funny, it would be on Weekend Update a half hour later. Writers, I didn't realize it at the time because I thought the whole world worked like that. And it was actually 2 times when I was with that show. While they were on the air doing Weekend Update, I was underneath the desk writing jokes and handing it up to them, okay? And I can't even begin to tell you that as a writer what kind of training that was, because you're under pressure, the audience is coming in, you need a script, and to this day it's a valuable thing because you learn, it teaches you that nothing that you've written is that precious. That you know what I'm saying? That there's another way to do it. There is a way to accommodate, you know, but it was also a way to hold your guns, and I'll show you in a second how exciting this was. It was carnival, it was live, because anything we did, if a joke worked, if a sketch worked, wow, you felt great. And if it didn't work, you felt embarrassed. But then on Monday, you started another work week, and you can redeem yourself the following Saturday. But it was so cool. I mean, for example, I remember on a Saturday night, I wrote for and with everybody back then. I mean, I wrote The Samurais for John Belushi, and I wrote a lot of Weekend Update, and a character for Garrett Morris called Chico Escuela, who said baseball been very, very good to me. But with Gilda was my buddy, and we created a character called Rosanna Dana. And there was one night we were going to go, there was a Japanese restaurant not too far away from Rockefeller Center, which was open all night or till 2 in the morning. And we were on our way to the restaurant. This is a Friday night, so it's actually Saturday morning. And we pass a newsstand, and they had tomorrow's newspapers, was in a bundle, you know, on the sidewalk, was already delivered. And the headline of the Daily News was, Mr. Ed dies. Remember the talking horse on TV, Mr. Ed died. You could tell it was a really heavy news day. So I go to a payphone, I call Lauren, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I said, listen, got some bad news for you. Mr. Ed died. He says, Alan, it's 2 in the morning, there better be more to this call than this. I said, well, how about on the show tonight, we interview Mrs. Ed, the grieving widow. So he says, Alan, you find a horse and we'll do it, okay? So now it's 2:15 in the morning, and I'm a Jew in New York looking for a horse. I call the prop master at home. I wake him up. I said, listen, it's Zweibel. I need a horse. This is a Gentile gentleman. He said, what kind? What kind? A horse. You know, 4 legs, a tail, teeth. It's a regulation horse. What do you, Alan, there are Clydesdales, you know, there are Pintos, there's Palominos. What kind of horse? Okay. All right. Picture Mr. Ed. Who would he choose for a bride? Get me that horse, okay? I go home, go to sleep, wake up, shower, have breakfast, go to the studio, and there's a horse there. Great, we're gonna do the horse thing, okay? And for the 7:30 dress rehearsal, we put it in. And how they do it is, Gilda was to play the voice of Mrs. Ed, and Bill Murray, who was the Weekend Update anchor person at the time, was going to interview Mrs. Ed on her way home from the funeral. And it was really adorable because we put a black hat and like a veil on the horse, you know. And Gilda was in Don Pardo's announce booth, okay, because what they do is they put molasses on the horse's lips, and the horse was trying to lick it off. And so she would talk, and it looks like the horse is talking, okay? So Bill Murray says, you know, did he suffer much? No, he went quietly, Bill. Wow, this is cool. We're going to do this on TV tonight. I don't know what happened between dress and air. But the second that this horse saw the red light on the camera, and he knew that he was on live TV, he flipped out. And he started running in circles. And we have no script for this. Who knew he was going to do this? So Gilda's going, oh, I'm so upset I'm chasing my tail, Bill. At one point, the horse breaks rank, runs out of the studio. Lauren says to a cameraman, follow that horse. And Gilda goes, oh, I'm so upset I'm going to throw myself out a window, Bill. And that was live TV. If it was taped, you would edit it, you would do it over again, you'd cut it all together. But it's out there, and it's stuff that I miss. You know, you know, and back then, like I said, 3 networks, and it sounds so tame right now to tell you, you know, the stuff that we had to do to get stuff past the censors back then. We had a censor. Her name was Jane Crowley. 400 pounds, ex-nun, dress shields, you know who I'm talking about. She would stay in the control room during dress rehearsal with the script, and she would go line by line. That was her last chance to censor us, because at 11:30 you go on the air live, and it's out there. You can't do anything about it. This was her last shot at it. Gilda had a character called Emily Litella, little old lady who was a little hard of hearing. So she would come on Weekend Update, and she would give an editorial reply to an editorial that she misheard. So she would come on, and rail on and on and on about saving Soviet jewelry. And then she'd be corrected, no, it's Soviet jewelry, not jewelry, jewelry. And she goes, oh, well, that's quite different. And she'd look at the audience and go, never mind. And it became a bit of a hit, you know. We did the Eagle Rights Amendment instead of the Equal Rights Amendment. Make Puerto Rico a state instead of a state. I think the lowest we ever went when we really started getting desperate, I think was presidential erections, if I'm not mistaken, okay? And it was around the time of presidential elections that Lawrence says, okay, it's enough already with this character. And I thought that there was still a little bit more shelf life in it, so I wanted to do one more. Oh, God. I think the editorial reply was about saving, it was endangered feces, okay? Dress rehearsal. Gilda's going, what are you going to save it for? What do you need it? What are you going to do with it? Where are you going to keep it? In the refrigerator? Where does it go? In a cupboard? Jane Curtin now is Weekend Update anchor person and says, no, that's endangered species, not feces, species. And Gilda looks and says, oh, that's quite different. Says, never mind. And there's like a little smattering of applause. You know, like I said, it was enough already with this character. But what I did was I extended Jane Curtin's part here. I gave her a speech where she chided Gilda and says, you know, you come on here every week, you get the topic wrong, you make a fool of yourself, you make a fool of this whole broadcast, you undermine any journalistic credibility we have. I don't want to see you again. I don't want to see you on the show again. Am I making myself clear? And Gilda said crystal clear, took a beat, and then under her breath said, bitch. Now, audience went nuts. Oh, wow, look, we're going to do this. Door to the control room opens up. Out waddles Jane Crowley. She finds me and she goes, Alan, you can't do this when we go on the air. I go, why? She says, Alan, you can't say bitch on television. This is 1977, right? I said, listen, Jane, let me explain something to you. I'm like 25. When Gilda says bitch to Jane Curtin, she's using the adverb form of the word. In effect, she's saying, Jane, you were acting bitchy toward me. I've heard that on television before, it's an adverb. She's not saying, Jane, you are a bitch, which is a noun. And I agree with you, it should never be on television. This is an adverb. She bought this crock of shit. I couldn't repeat it if you put a gun to my head, but bitch got on television. I'll tell you one more. There was this great writer on the show, one of the architects of the show, who had founded the National Lampoon, previously named Michael O'Donoghue. And at this particular point, I'm producing the Weekend Update segment of the show. And he calls me up, he goes, hey, Alan, what do you say that we have Weekend Update brought to you by a product that we make up? I said, let's go for it. So this particular Saturday night, he has Don Pardo say, and now Weekend Update, brought to you by Pussy Whip, the dessert topping for cats. It worked great. It worked so great that I wanted to do one the following week. So in the 7:30 dress rehearsal, I had Don Pardo say, and now Weekend Update, brought to you by Blue Balls. B-L-E-U, Blue Balls. The cheese snack from France. It worked great. It worked so great I wanted to do it on TV. Everyone loved it, except one person, Door to the control room opens. Out waddles Jane Crowley. She comes up to me. She says, Alan, you can't do that. You can't, when we go on the air, I go, can't do what you can't say blue balls on television. I go, why? She says, because it has to do with the male genitalia. And I said, Jane, last week you let us say pussy whip, which is clearly the female genitalia, but this week, what kind of sexist organization are you running here? So she said, give me a minute. She goes into the control room, picks up a phone, calls God, I guess. 10 minutes later, she comes into the studio and she says, Alan, we discussed it, and I've come to the conclusion that because I gave you pussy whip last week, I'll be more than happy to give you blue balls this week. I said, you know, that's not necessary. Let us just say it on television. We'll call it even, you know. I left SNL in 1980, the first time that Lorne Michaels left the show, and we all went out into the world. I got married. I married Robin, and I chose to stay in New York. I started writing plays. I had my first novel, a little novella published. And as far as my relationship, my friendship, my platonic friendship with Gilda, you know, this was pre-internet. It's sort of like, it became Christmas cards, you know, and a phone call on your birthday, that kind of thing. But then I got called to LA to write a pilot for Garry Shandling. And I went to LA and we wrote it and we shot this pilot. And during this time, I would call Gilda and I'd say, hey, you know, I'm out here for a while. Let's do something. Let's have dinner. Let's go to a movie or something. And she would always say yes. And then at the last minute, she would always break the date. And this happened 3 or 4 times, and I got really pissed. And I called my wife, Robin. I said, I don't think Gilda wants to be my platonic friend anymore. And Robin called Gilda, then Robin called me back. She says, call her right now. You got to call her. And I called her and I said, what's going on? And she said, you know, I don't feel well, Zweibel. I go, what's wrong? She says, well, I got Epstein-Barr virus. She says, do you know what that is? And I said, yeah, that's sort of like mono, right? She says, I'm telling you, Zweibel, my head wants to do everything we always did, but my body just won't let me. I said, well, what do the doctors say? And she says, they say it's just got to run its course. And she said, well, when will you be back out here? I said, well, if this pilot sells into series, I'll be out in about 6 weeks to start hiring a staff and to, get the ball rolling. She said, do me a favor, call me when you come back out. I said, fine. So I got on a plane and went home. Me and Robin now had 2 kids, living in New Jersey. I went back 6 weeks later to LA, and I rented a house because we were going to start this show. And I don't know how much you know about Los Angeles, but who's ever a house you either buy or rent, the bigger the star that they are, the more status you have, okay? So I rented a house from Larry Fine from the Three Stooges. Larry was my landlord, you know. There was like a dent in the wall in the living room. I figured, oh, Mo must have done that, you know. And we're moving in, and all the, rented furniture, and Gilda shows up at the door, and she's got, as a housewarming gift, this big potted plant. So we took it, and we put it in the corner, and I just looked at her, and I go, God, you look beautiful. How do you feel? And she said, Zweibel, I just found out I don't have Epstein-Barr virus. I said, great, we can go to Laker games. She says, I have cancer. I said, what? She said, I have ovarian cancer, Zweibel, and I need you to help me get through this part of my life. And I said, what should I do? And she said, make me laugh. And that was my role in my friend's life when she got sick. I would tell her jokes on the phone. Garry Shandling and I did a show every week for 4 years. and we would send her, the video, of the show, like a Hallmark card. And that was one of the first times as a writer, okay, where being a writer, I was able to take everything that I felt and put it into my words, because everything before that was sketches. Everything before that was fun. And now, oh, wait a second, we're at the part now where we can get sick. And I devoted it to that, and it was always about making her laugh. And as a matter of fact, the last TV performance that she did was as a guest on It's Garry Shandling show, and she got nominated for an Emmy Award. And like I said, make her laugh, make her laugh. And even towards the very end, I went to give blood. My platonic friend, I went to see the Sinai, and I was on the gurney, and the nurse came over to me and gave me a pad and a pen. And I said, well, what's this for? She says, well, Gilda likes to know whose blood she's getting. I said, do her a favor, make her laugh. She's having a tough time. So I wrote, Dear Gilda, I knew I'd get some fluid of mine into you one way or another. Which I thought said it sort of nicely, And then she died. And then I had to deal with, okay, my friend died. And my wife, Robin, said, you've got to write about the two of you. And I went, no, I can't do that. She says, to hell with book sales or anything like that. She said, your best friend died. You haven't cried yet. She said, deal with it. So I sat down and I wanted to relive the relationship. I wanted to visit it one more time. I wrote this book called Bunny Bunny, which was, I reconstructed everything that I can remember about our relationship. Where did we meet? Oh, behind the potted plant. And it's all in dialogue. She talks, I talk, she talks. I didn't want the formality of paragraphs, of punctuation. I wanted the words to touch each other one more time. And when I was done, I was going to put this away. Catharsis is over. And then, I showed it to Gene Wilder, Gilda's husband, and he urged me to publish it. So I did, and it became a play. And it was the first time, like I said, as a writer, I said, wow, there's something really, there's other stuff you can do. There's other stuff, there's other buttons that I can push. What had happened subsequent to that, I went on with our lives. I had 3 children now, and boy, I had hit a really rough patch. For some reason, everything was going wrong. Every show that I created got canceled. Movies, well, remember before I said when I stayed in New York, I wrote my first book. I had written this book, a little novella called North. And it was, our son Adam was around 9 years old at the time. And he was at that age where we would be at the dinner table and he'd look across at me and Robin. And you can tell from the expression on his face that he was going, I can do better than these two. So I wrote a book about this little boy named North who declared he didn't feel appreciated, and he declared himself a free agent and went all over the world offering his services as a devoted son to the highest bidding set of parents. And the book did okay. It did okay. But then Rob Reiner, who I had met, he hosted the 3rd Saturday Night Live ever, he read the book. He says, I'm a director now. He had done Spinal Tap. He had done Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men. He said, let's make a movie out of this. Well, this is every writer's dream. You write a book, and now you're writing the screenplay for it. So I'm out in California, and $50 million movie, Elijah Wood, Bruce Willis, my pal Dan Aykroyd, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Jason Alexander, and it's great. The greatest night of my life. I flew my parents out. There's this big premiere, and it was just a writer's dream until the next morning, the reviews came out. Now, I don't know how many of you remember Roger Ebert's review of North, or carry it with you in your wallet. However, I hated this movie. Hated this movie. Hated it. Hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience-insulting moment of it. Hated the sensibility that thought anyone would like it. Hated the implied insult to the audience by its belief that anyone would actually be entertained by it. Now, on the surface, this may seem like an unfavorable review here. It was horrible. We were living in LA at the time where people root for each other to fail. You know, the kids would come home from school and they go, can we change our last names? You know, can we move? Can we do something? And this was the beginning. As easy as it was when I started, this is how hard it was becoming now. Everything I touched just went bad. It was really bad. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was getting depressed. And LA was getting to me. And finally, I saw a sign that said, "You too can complete a marathon." It was a sign I saw in a Ben & Jerry's on Vicente Boulevard in LA. And I went home and I said to I told my wife about that sign, and she said, "You should do it." I said, "Do what?" "You should run a marathon." I said, "You're insane. It's 26.2 miles." She said, all you do is you're lying on the couch, you're getting fat, you're so self-indulgent, you got to get out of yourself a little bit. Have a goal, get out of the house, clear your head. So I joined this training group where I trained to run a marathon. And I figured, all right, and it sort of works because there's these endorphins that kick in, which I wish I knew about in college. I would have saved a fortune, in drugs. A t-shirt and shorts and boom, God, Well, I ran the New York City Marathon. And, all right, well, before you applaud, let's talk about the word ran for just a second. You know the New York City Marathon, for those of you who don't, everyone starts in Staten Island. You go over the Verrazano Bridge, you go from Brooklyn to Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx, back to Manhattan, into Central Park, 26.2 miles later, Tavern on the Green, you've run a marathon. So I go to New York, and I line up with 33,000 other people in Staten Island. On your mark, get set, go. I leave Staten Island, I go over the Verrazano Bridge. I'm in Brooklyn now, about 4 miles into the race, when word came back that the winner had not only crossed the finish line, but was already on a plane back to Kenya. And I'm hauling my ass, through the 5 boroughs. But it was my wife was right, it was incredibly therapeutic because there's a suspension of everything, and coming from New York, it was like running through my life, I was born in Brooklyn, my dad always worked in Manhattan, that's where SNL was, the Yankees were in the Bronx, so it was all these sense memories, and the one that really got me was when we were running through Queens, because as a kid growing up on Long Island, Queens is where my heroes, Simon and Garfunkel, were from Queens. And it brought back this memory for me of when I was in college. I loved Paul Simon, he was this poet. And somehow he was able to, everything I was always feeling, he was able to capture in lyrics and in song. And it was, I was taking this creative writing class that I was failing. This is in college, and this is during the Vietnam years, and if I failed this course, I would have failed out of college. And I was really desperate, and so what I did as a last-ditch effort for my last journal entry, I took the lyrics to the song The Boxer and handed it in as my poem. Teacher was this 92-year-old woman named Nora Rent, and I figured, you know, she'll never recognize it. So I handed in, and now comes Monday, and I was right. She didn't recognize it. That was the good news. Bad news was she was so impressed, she asked me to come up and read it to the rest of the class. And I'm begging off, and I don't like talking in front of people. You know, it's fine. I'm glad you like my poem. Alan, come on, Al, you're not going to believe what Alan did. So now I get up, and I got the lyrics that are on the liner notes to the biggest selling album of the year. It won like 5 Grammys. And everybody in the class are all my age. Everyone listens to the same albums. And now I'm up there and I gotta read this to them. So I look at the time and I see there was still like a half hour left, so there was, you know, no chance of running out the clock. And I looked over one more time at the 92-year-old professor. Very disappointed to see that she was still alive. And I start reading. I am just a poor boy, though my story's seldom told. I have squandered my resistance for a pocket full of mumbles such as promises. All lies and jest, still a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. I take a breather and I look over the page, and all the kids in the class are like, and I look over at 92-year-old Nora Rent, who's beaming. You know, she's taking pride in this Jewish kid who somehow captured the gritty life on New York streets. And she continued. When I left my home and my family, I was no more than a boy, in the company of strangers, in the quiet of the railway station, running scared, laying low, seeking out the poor quarters where the ragged people go, looking for the places only they would know. And it was at that exact moment that everyone in the class started singing lie la lie, lie la lie, lie lie la lie, lie la lie, lie la lie, lie lie la lie, lie la lie, lie lie. I can't even begin to describe to you how hard that knot in my stomach was, okay? But the weirdest reaction of all was the 92-year-old teacher who said to the class, "It's inspiring, isn't it?" Things have been pretty good since then, and I'm really happy to say that I've had the greatest time in the world being a writer. To all my fellow writers out there, it's fun, isn't it? I mean, it's hard and it's all that stuff, but you know something? I'm now, there's a certain level, you know, R.L. Stine, my God, you belong on Rushmore. Are you on Rushmore? I just don't know it. You know, and now I've written a children's book that have my kids' names in it, and those kids now have their own children, and they're reading it to my grandchildren, and I can't think of anything better or more gratifying. And I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank the Viners and the Shenitzes who have been really nice and hospitable to me. Thank you. It's been an honor to be here.
you, Ellen. That was wonderful.